Hey there, horror movie tea sippers.
The following podcast episode will contain spoilers for the movie we are about to review. If you have not seen the movie and do not wish to have anything ruined prematurely, please do not continue to watch or listen until you have seen the movie.
And welcome to the Horror Movie Tea Podcast. Today is our 200th episode! Yay! And
still alive!
Still alive. We're still at it. And we decided it would be amazing to have V, which was our first podcast guest, and then Keith, which is our first YouTube podcast guest, and thought it'd be fun to have us all on the stream. Especially there's been so many times where I've been hearing either V talk or you Keith talk, and I'm like, I feel like you two would mesh well together. So
the melding of the minds.
Yeah. Yes. So this will probably be a little bit longer of an episode, just because we want to initiate additional discussion. Just talk about vampires, because today we are covering Bram Stoker's Dracula, which came out in 1992. So the very dramatic, more recent, more modern rendition of it. Well, it's modern because it's 1992 versus the 30s. Yeah. But anyways,
it's more updated than Nosferatu
by a long shot.
Yes.
Although, have y'all done the 1930s Dracula yet?
No. That Keith has.
I've seen it. It's a good movie.
If for no other reason, y'all need to talk about it just so you can see Bela Lugosi do his face.
And I think Oldman in this movie is definitely riffing off that earlier.
Yeah. Definitely got that vibe. But before we go into the movie, let's grab our cups and talk about tea. I'll go first just to start us off. I was seeing if I should put any of our guests in the hot seat, but I won't.
You already know what a disaster I'm going to be. So.
Oh, yeah.
So V will go
first.
This will be a 2-hour episode at this rate.
Yeah,
probably.
This is just the intro.
But I am drinking the what's the company name? Springs
Maybe that's
Inn.
the company's name.
Oh crap, tea.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh man, could you imagine? But I'm drinking the Matcha Moon Superior Ceremonial Grade Matcha Tea. It's literally just matcha powder that you put in the cup. You do the little whiskey whisk, get all bubbly and frothy, and then you add more water and mix it all together, and you got matcha tea. Anyways, are you drinking, Jess?
You need to give those instructions to the "If You Want to Make a Pretty Cake" song.
I'm drinking Tazo's Regenerative Organic Zen tea, and it's got organic green tea, organic lemon verbena, organic spearmint, organic lemongrass, and organic lemon oil.
Ooh.
So nice and fresh. Interesting that we both went for green tea, though.
Well, it's it gives you some alertness without the jitters, so That's why I like it. But what are you drinking, Keith?
Okay, well, my choice is very boring in comparison, but I just went to the cupboard. It's a very British choice, though, so that's fit. So I've gone for the Very Berry Knightsbridge brand. So
okay.
That's what I'm drinking, with a touch of honey in it.
Ah, tasty.
So, yeah, that's what I've gone with.
V. Looking at you, V. No, V! V! You had one job. Two jobs, but
I'm being naughty and drinking White Rhino coffee.
Get out.
Okay, bye.
You are officially banned from the podcast. You've got too many strikes.
It's been a good run.
Banned.
Well, now that we've finally covered tea, for our tea sippers out there, brew yourself a cup of tea, sit back, relax, and we hope you enjoy the review. So for the summary of specifically Bram Stoker's. Okay, let me.
I think Bram Stoker's Dracula is a completely different movie.
Oh no! Oh no! Bram Stoker's Dracula. Okay, so for the summary for Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's Dracula, so you know what it is. I don't need to say the summary. Okay, this man goes to visit Dracula's castle for I think it's real estate. I always
It is.
Yeah, it's real estate. And then his fiance starts getting seduced by Dracula in a way, or at least compelled to like him or whatever. And yeah, so that's it. That's
why do we let you do the summary?
I know.
I have
What a train
Plex
wreck.
pulled up over here with the summary. I could have just read it. So when Dracula leaves the captive Jonathan Harker in Transylvania for London in search of Mina Murray, the reincarnation of Dracula's long dead wife Elizabetha, obsessed vampire hunter Dr. Van Helsing sets out to end the madness.
Okay. Nice.
That's the summary.
A nice,
Pretty
refined summary. Yes, that was very nice, Jess. Thank you.
Better than Mina gets horny.
I mean, to be fair, that is half of the movie. Is Mina gets horny for Dracula?
Yeah.
While her fiance is being held hostage by three vampire women.
Well, while
She's
he's
like
horny
Jonathan
for Dracula, Dracula's wives.
Monica Bellucci in her prime. Who could resist?
This one is tough to rate because it's not my typical go-to movie, but at the same time it is cinematic gold because it's everything you want in a modern rendition of an older story where it's over the top, but they go full seriously in. And the cinematography, I will say my one complaint with the cinematography is it's beautiful in some places, but then in other places you're like, why that transition? That was a choice. But it's it is
about the Blue Inferno.
Yes. Yeah, that was a choice
that was
too.
A choice.
There were a few choices being made there.
But it's
Yeah.
if I was, let's say, a student and I had to read Dracula, or I wasn't a student, I just want to read Dracula and I want to watch a movie about it, this would probably be a good solid starting point. At least as far as if you don't want to watch the older classics. This one's tough. I'm going to give it a 7.25, I think, for me. Just because it is a really solid movie, but it's in its own ridiculous way, and in the best of ridiculous ways. It's ridiculous because it fits with the story. And it was interesting, and I haven't read the book, but V has, and so we were watching it together. And so it was nice to have V's commentary to be oh, they added the hairy palms and and stuff like that. And so it was interesting that they added these additional touches from the book. But I will say my one complaint is the fact that they made the whole Mina and Dracula thing was kind of weird. I feel they took it to a whole new level that the other renditions in the book didn't. But I'm also not very versed in Dracula, so maybe there's something that like I missed with the original lore.
No, you didn't.
But to me, it seemed like they. But to me, it seemed like they were like going a little bit pushing too much the Mina and Dracula thing. But yeah.
I'll patiently wait my turn to rip into the Mina and Dracula thing.
Oh no, by all means, go ahead.
Like basically anything from that movie that has to do with Mina being a reincarnation of like Dracula's original wife is not in the book whatsoever. That was completely added for this movie.
Not canon.
It's not canon. And so the thing that I found really weird is that, or interesting, or however you want to think about it, is all of the book accurate scenes they went super campy over the top with. They had some really good choices for some of it, like having Dracula's shadow absolutely not sync up with what he's doing.
That was a really nice touch.
That was awesome.
But it's also like anything that is a book accurate scene from Dracula is going to be a little bit silly anyway, because there's a lot of things that some people still find the book Dracula to be scary, and I respect that opinion. I did not find Dracula to be scary. I laughed through a lot of it because there was so much of it that just the mental image of it was super over the top. And so, yeah, when you make that into a visual thing of him like crawling down the wall like a lizard, that's going to look a little bit silly.
Yeah.
So
it'd be a little disconcerting if you actually saw it in person, but
yeah, but in a movie you're like
whatever.
Yeah. It's like that's a thing that's happening.
Yeah.
But so like they have these like super campy over the top stuff for the book accurate scenes, and they have Van Helsing being about as unhinged as he is in the book. So like Anthony Hopkins nailed that entirely. Like,
oh, he was
100%.
The only thing that we were missing from Van Helsing was 3 pages worth of monologue every time he opens his mouth, which I think was cut for time. But
probably.
And they cut all this other stuff for time and like jumped over a whole bunch of details, and we lost a lot of context to things so that they could shoehorn in this Mina X Dracula fanfic, like 10,000 characters in the middle of it.
Yeah. So what's your rating?
Gary
Rating
Oldman as young Dracula makes this 11 out of 10.
You have all these complaints about how they didn't like anything, and then you're just like 11 out of 10 because
it's not canon. This is all wrong.
I can still be entertained by it. Like the entertainment value is still there.
Yeah, it is entertaining.
Okay. Well, I'll go next. So I've not read the book, so I don't really have any of that stuff. I've seen several versions, though. So I appreciate that it tries to update it. I appreciate that it goes for a new kind of Dracula. And I think one of the reasons I'm kind of interested in the character and the story is because you can explore different sexualities with it. And I feel like this is what this movie does. But because I definitely get a vibe of there's like homosexual like undertones between, is it Jonathan, the Keanu Reeves character? Yeah.
Yes.
And Dracula.
Yeah, I was shipping them and I was like, now Keith.
Yeah.
Like, the first second they were on screen together, Alyssa's like, I ship them.
Yeah. I mean, he sticks out a sword, so you've got a phallus imagery right there. And at one point he says, he's mine, he's, no one else can touch him. So I think they were definitely going for that. And then you have obviously a little bit of a lesbian angle with Lucy and with Mina. So they're definitely pushing the cut out on that stuff. Mm-hmm. But as a movie, I think it's very messy. It can't really make up its mind what it wants to be, because there was times later on in the movie where it was very like they were going for a more Western action style vibe. I mean, Hopkins with his whole yeehaw, you know, like that whole performance he did as Van Helsing, he felt like he was sort of out of a Western type thing. But then there's times where it seemed to be going for a period piece sort of vibe, like the stuff with obviously Jonathan and Mina, and their relationship, I thought, just put me to sleep, basically. I'm a pretty big Keanu Reeves fan, but not in this movie. I thought he was such a wet blanket, and
then like the terrible, the accent.
The accent.
I mean, I feel like none of them really were that great at accents.
No,
like Anthony Hopkins, and he had
really exaggerated Southern accents, didn't you, as well, in there, which was pretty bad.
Yeah, he couldn't keep Van Helsing's accent the same in any two shots, and there was one scene where he sounded like Tommy Wiseau.
And he's known for doing that now, but this was at a point where he was seen as a more serious sort of actor. But yeah, there's some fun hammy moments. There's some fun. I quite like when Lucy's fiance bursts in and's like, what the hell's going on here? Yes. And that made me laugh out loud last night when I was watching it. But I think the problem with the movie is then it's sort of a hodgepodge of a lot of different things, and there's sort of no continuity to it. I think it rushes through whole sections of like the book and things, and just like it's nothing. And I think it's almost doing that as a way to say that was then, this is now, we're doing like a new Dracula. But as a result, some of those scenes feel like they could have been left out and just felt a bit choppy and messy. I think some of the sets look really good, and some of the cinematography was really good, but also some of the effects have really dated now. I'm thinking of like the eyes, like on the Red Sky when he was like coming in on the carriage. That just looks like it's done on a computer, but probably at the time it might have been acceptable effects. But yeah, they obviously introduce a lot of things in this with like the powers that Dracula has, but they don't really explain that, and there seems no rhyme or reason for a lot of this stuff. Because it's like with Mina, like 1 minute she'll seem to be having this exciting, erotic night with Dracula, and then she's just back at the place again with like the other people, and it just seems like nothing's happened to her in a way. And the relationship with Dracula was just so forced, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Yeah, I didn't ship that pairing.
No. I did quite like the ending. I thought it was quite a bold ending to have her be the one to like make the sacrifice, almost stay behind and make sure he was going to die. And she was the one who had to do it. But overall, I mean, there's lots of continuity errors, lots of kind of bad effects, lots of silly, hammy moments, some of which I enjoyed, some of which I didn't. I'll say actually, just because it's a good cast, but I'd say Sandy Frost stands out actually as Lucy. I was pretty impressed with her, because she was a newcomer at the time. Thought she had quite a bit of personality. But overall, it's not a terrible film, but there were definitely moments where I sort of nodded off. So I'll give it 4.5.
I will say, watching Nosferatu and then now this movie, I enjoyed this movie way more.
Oh yeah.
And then I feel like I could keep up with it a little bit more. But yeah, I can definitely see the mixture of tones and stuff that you mentioned, and the issues with some of the pacing. So
yeah, and a lot of the context is definitely missing, because there's one scene where you see where Mina tries to attack Van Helsing, and you see him hold something to her forehead and it burns her. And after that scene happened, I was telling Alyssa, like, by the way, you can't tell from the shot, but that's a communion wafer because that's what he uses in the book. But it's just a, like, in nondescript disc film.
Okay.
And a lot of...
I assumed it was a communion wafer, but
it's like
it would be hard to tell.
Yeah, because Alyssa, I think you said that you thought it was like a coin or something.
It's like, and you know, it's like I feel like someone who isn't Catholic or super familiar with the Catholic faith, it would be harder to pick out that detail than someone who grew up Catholic and was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is.
Well, especially because, like, usually, and for one thing, like, it's one of the big wafers. It's the one that, like, the priest uses, and that usually has something on it. It's got, like, a little cross in it or something like that. Maybe they didn't at the time period that it's supposed to be set in, but for a modern audience, that would be more of a cue of, like, this is, like, something that's blessed.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the stuff with, like, the lore dumping of Dracula's abilities and why he has them and all that, we lost that because, again, they cut Van Helsing giving a 3-page monologue every time he opens his mouth, because that's where you get all of that lore and all of that background and all that stuff. Yeah, he is the exposition machine who goes around and is like, good friend John, let me tell you about all of these things about the vampire.
Yeah. Also, like with Van Helsing, he definitely came off as more of a villain in this movie. And I get the impression from earlier versions you're meant to be more on his side, but maybe it's just because Anthony Hopkins is a natural villain, maybe, but it's like...
He's got a villain face, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, like, in the... Sorry, that made me think of the Mask of Zorro with him as... Yeah, it was kind of hard to believe him as Zorro. But anyways. But yeah, totally 100% agree. He's got more villain vibes.
Did you also think they leaned a bit more into the religious stuff in this?
I don't... Compared to the book, they didn't lean hard enough into the religious stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like it should have played a little bit bigger of a factor in this. I would give this a 6.5. Personally. It's a bit of a cluster, but it's also kind of fun to watch.
Yes.
And the cast is solid, and you can tell that the cast is having fun with it.
Yeah.
So I feel like this definitely wasn't Keanu Reeves' strongest role. But everybody else did hilariously wonderful. It was entertaining to watch. I probably won't watch it regularly, but it got several laughs out of me, for sure. There were some choices.
Yeah. With
the animation and set design and wardrobes. Since no one else is going to mention it, boobhead Gary Oldman made me laugh.
Me and we were calling him a butthead.
Rewind. I had to rewind because I was missing a lot of what they were saying, because I was just like, why does he have boobs on his head?
Yeah.
I couldn't.
The special effects makeup, though, was really solid, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Because really, like, the CG effects that were like crap, but like the actual like makeup was pretty solid.
The other thing that I wrote down about in the like costume department was the Twizzler armor from the opening scenes.
Yes.
That was a
that
choice.
was funny. Yeah.
That was definitely a choice. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a laugh out of like the silhouettes during the battle scenes, and you just had someone stabbing someone and then like flying up in the air, like
with the backdrops.
Yeah, that was really funny. But So
I feel
cheap.
like a lot of it is definitely dated. Like it feels like a 90s movie
yeah.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But the fact that they had so much fun doing it, and there were just some moments that were just perfect. Like Anthony Hopkins delivered this deadpan line after Lucy dies, where he asks for some like autopsy kind of tools. And the guy's like, "You're really going to autopsy her?" And he's like, "Oh no, I'm just going to cut off her head and take out her heart."
Yeah.
Like it was full on Hannibal Lecter vibes when he delivered that line. And I just expected him to ask for some papa beans after. But I don't know. There were some things that detracted from it that we'll get to in the realism, of course. But it just kind of takes you out of the movie setting and it breaks the immersion a little bit. I do feel like they were kind of all over the place with Mina and Dracula's relationship. Like she would be super into him and then I'm not going to see you again. I'm leaving and going to marry my fiance now. Bye.
Yeah.
Or I just had this wonderful night with this dude that I barely know, and then I'm going to go see my friend and not tell her anything about it.
Yeah. Agreed.
So it was just kind of odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of that oddness, particularly with the romance arc, is that it really does feel shoehorned in because they're like,
Yeah.
we still have to hit all of these like book canon plot points, and we just got to like wedge this like love story in here.
It felt like they used a crowbar because
Yeah.
honestly, like the particular scene of Dracula coming to her bed was just, it almost felt oogie. Like I don't ship those two actors at all.
They didn't have a whole lot of chemistry.
There was no chemistry whatsoever. It felt really forced between those two in particular. So
I think I can understand it a little bit from the point of view of the story they were telling, like where they were presenting it as he's a more exciting, sexy option than her very dry, straight-laced fiance, or they were engaged, weren't they?
I get that. It just felt forced.
It just wasn't very well done in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like honestly, I like the fact that they kind of were trying to change up the story in that way, where it's like, especially like having her be like the reincarnation of his lost love. Like I thought that was an interesting twist that could have added to this story, but yeah, 100% agree. It just, it's like between the chemistry of the characters and then, or the actors, more like it, and the way that they paced it and stuff, it felt very forced.
And like the main scene that pops into my mind is the one where he's like, he comes to her bed after like they've after Lucy got turned into a vampire and they had to kill her, and she's like, "Yes, I want to be with you," and he's like, "No, I am a monster. I am Dracula." And she's like, "Oh, you killed my best friend. I'm gonna weakly hit you for a little bit, and then, but I still find you sexy, and I still want to like be with you." He's like, "Oh, okay, I'll turn you into a vampire now."
Oh wait, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. You're so pure. No, I want you.
I love you.
I really do want to. Okay, fine.
Yeah. It's like they couldn't make up their minds whether he was a full-blown villain or not, sort of thing.
Yeah. It's like either make him, what is it? What's the phrase? Like sympathy for the villain or something like that?
Sympathy
like
for the devil.
Sympathy for the devil.
Or sympathetic villain.
Yeah. It's like, if you're going to make a villain type character sympathetic, then like go hard in, because it's like the only like quote unquote sympathy that I had was from like the beginning scene, but then they didn't really like expand. Like I feel like they could have just like expanded a little bit more on that, or added like additional things to like show his suffering. Because I mean, come on, he's got like a handful of like vampire wives. Like he's living a good life. Like
He's doing well for himself.
Yeah.
And like, if you want to have like a good, sympathetic but still villainous Dracula, the Castlevania show did a really good job at that. Without being like, we're going to hit all of the Dracula book plot points. They're like, we're going to have a completely different plot that's just going to happen to have Dracula in it as a character.
Yeah.
But that was a good sympathetic Dracula. Of like, we got to take all of the source material and be like, we don't need that shit. Dracula, after he's already a vampire, falls in love with a human woman because she's smart and she bosses him around. And then she gets killed by the church, and he's like, well, fuck all y'all. I'm going to destroy everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Very good example.
Another thing I noticed about this sort of time is using the author's name in the title, because a few years after this, they released Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, so they did the same thing. And I think obviously it's a marketing thing, but I think also it's maybe just this idea of them saying this is a new version which is going to respect the original.
Yeah, that's my impression too. Yeah.
But
and it's like that. That's an interesting thing about this movie, where it's like they literally have the author's name in the title, and they are true to the book up to a particular point, and then they're like, near, like, going off on their own way.
Just take the book and chunk it out the window.
They read like the Spark Notes.
Yeah.
And they were true to the Spark Notes of the book. They read the first half maybe. And then because that, like, up until, like, not counting the cold open to the movie, the first chunk of it up until Dracula gets to England is pretty book accurate. Yeah. It's when, like, basically the second he hits shore in England, that's when they just, like, jump all the sharks. And then they get a little bit through that, like, shoehorned in plot, and then they're like, oh wait, we're still doing Dracula, so we got to make sure that we hit these other plot points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they just kind of slip a fan fiction in there.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
And by slip, I mean they took a crowbar and
they slipped and fell and got the script and their fan fiction pages mixed up together, and they couldn't figure out how to get them apart.
Oh no.
They jammed it in there.
It's mixed up. Oh, well, I guess this is what we're doing.
And there was only one bed.
Well, so I figure before we go into maybe some, like, vampire lore, maybe we can go ahead and cover realism and go from there. Okay. So for realism, like, not so much thinking towards the story itself, but more thinking, like, towards, like, the movie and the historical accuracy. I feel like there were some period accurate clothing, but a lot of it was more like on the interpretive side, where it's like we're giving you the air of this period, but we're actually not going to, like, replicate it exactly. Which is fine. But there were, like, a few, especially with, like, Winona Ryder's character, Mina, there were some dresses. Well, I mean, even Lucy, to be honest, there's some dresses that she wore, and I'm like, that is definitely, like, not that's not period accurate vibes that I get from it. Oh man. And then I'll just well, and then the fact that is like I understand that vampires, especially in Dracula, kind of have this air to them that kind of like seduces humans and removes their resistance and whatever. But it's like I feel like Jonathan and Mina both fell way too quickly for either the vampire wives or for Dracula himself. At least with Dracula, there's kind of some workup so that you could kind of see, but it's like whenever she saw him, I didn't really get a lot of like, oh, she's mesmerized by him or anything like that. It's just, and maybe it's just like the poor acting or chemistry on their part and not necessarily like what they could have necessarily done different storyline wise. But yeah, as far as like a realism, I feel like they fell a little bit too quickly. Like have them break down and give in, but have a little bit of a fight first. Have their wills be broken. And then plus like they showed the Harry Palms thing, but now that I think about it, they didn't show the Harry Palms again throughout the movie. Like they just showed them
just that once.
And then and then they're like, no, he's got normal palms now. This is how he blends in. But I did like the fact that I mean, this is older vampire lore, of course, but I like the fact that the teeth are retractable. That is so much more realistic to me as far as like blending in and being incognito than like a lot of these more modern day vampires where it's like, it was like we have to either like talk with not moving our lips much or we can't be amongst humans at all. It's like for this, especially with vampires being built up as such like predatory, like they are like the humans predator and stuff like that. So it's like you would think that they would have a better way to like blend in and be able to like snatch their prey or whatever. Because it's like if they're, and I do like the fact that he was able to go in the sunlight, because if it was the whole thing on like, oh, he can't go into the sunlight, it'd destroy him. It's like all you would have to do is stay in your house at night, and then you'd be like, or stay at your house at night with the doors closed, and then you'd be like fairly safe. So it's like, ooh, like it makes vampires less threatening versus, oh, they're anyone that you meet on the street and they might snatch you up and drink your blood, you know? It's like, that's a lot more terrifying than like, oh, just don't go out at night and you'll be safe. But as far as like a realism rating, I think I'm going to give it like a 3, taking all of the points that I said into account. I think a 3. I mean, you know, it's not realistic, and I'm not claiming it is, but like in context with like the story and the lore and stuff, I feel like a 3 is reasonable-ish. But yeah, yep. Who's next?
It's Fee's turn.
So a lot of my realism thoughts on it would be from a combination of what was actual vampire lore at the time and what was specifically the lore of Bram Stoker's Dracula, because there were he took a handful of some vampire lore and kind of canonized it alongside some other vampire lore that was canonized in Carmilla, which came out it's either shortly before or shortly after, but around the same time period. A lot of the vampire lore really came down to at the time as a way of like, number one, you got to make sure you bury people properly and like consecrate them. And 2, don't go out of your house at night, which is a very common thing for a lot of like folk tales and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Darkness breeds death,
basically. And a lot of those like ancient stuff kind of gets carried over. And then also when you consider the time period of when Dracula came out, there was a lot of it that was Eastern European xenophobia that got fed into it. That's why Dracula's from Transylvania. He's from like the Romania area.
Well, and sorry, that made me trigger something too. I know a lot of vampire lore comes from the fear of people getting, at the time they called it consumption, which now we call tuberculosis, where it's like they believe that you have to kill the original person that got sick, or you have to like put a stake in their heart and like do like all of the vampire stuff to prevent other people in the house from getting sick, because they believe that other people got sick because that person is like rising from the dead and like doing stuff to them. So that's like another piece of the vampire lore to add on what you said as far as like stake in the heart, cutting off the head, and burying people properly.
Yeah, and then later on, it also became part of like, we're going to put a slab of concrete over your grave to make sure that you really aren't coming back, just in cases. Never mind the people that we accidentally bury alive.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff with vampire lore, especially by the time we got to Dracula, where we had kind of a mixture of a bunch of different ideas and beliefs. Because vampire lore historically is a huge bucket of things. You could basically say anything is a vampire and you would probably be correct. There was like a particular vampire legend of a woman that would just detach her head and like her shoulders and her spine from the rest of her body and like fly over the village, and like her bodily fluids would drop on people and that would kill them, and then she'd like swoop down and go and like fly away. And
That's new. I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, that's a very, very old vampire legend.
Huh. I kind of enjoy that, actually. That's hilarious.
So basically, like, you could throw a dart at the wall and be like, that's a vampire of whatever it lands on, and you'd probably be correct at some point in some place in history.
I'm coming up with some new Halloween decoration ideas.
No,
Yeah.
Just have it on like a rope in your hallway, and so every time someone opens the door, it like comes flying towards them.
I'm thinking like a windsock type of situation.
Yeah.
Oh.
So she's just flying over your house type of thing.
Yeah. I'd 3D print the spinal column.
There you go.
So they can actually articulate and move.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm down for it. I can dig it.
Yeah.
Just another Friday night.
Yep.
Just another Friday night.
Scare all the kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds good.
And so then, of course, with Bram Stoker's Dracula, there's a ton of it is Christianity. Like, Van Helsing's number one tool for vampire hunting is communion wafers. In the book, when they are going toe to toe with Lucy after she's become a vampire, they actually meet her outside of her tomb, and they have the tomb closed off. And Van Helsing takes a bunch of communion wafers, crushes them up, turns them into a paste, and seals all the cracks in the tomb with it, so that when she turns into mist, she can't get in there to run away from them.
Smart.
And those are a lot easier to get a hold of than like gallons upon gallons of holy water or a whole bunch of like silver stuff. So yeah, it was like communion wafers and steaks, and that's his kit basically, and like some crosses. So yeah, like they could have dialed the Christianity up to 11 in this movie, and it would have been pretty book accurate. And that was part of where the horror came from as well, because when the book came out, it didn't come out in all one book in one thing. It came out as in pieces, and it's written as diary entries. So people are reading this and they're reading these diary entries and they're getting scared out of their wits because they're like, this to them feels like something that could actually be happening.
Yeah.
So given all of that context, for this movie specifically, for realism from those types of perspectives, I would give it maybe like a 6 to a 7, just because when they did decide to be book accurate, they hit those points of it. They didn't explain why they did those things, but they were like book accurate, and they were accurate to the lore that either was happening before Dracula or got canonized by Dracula.
I kind of wish we had gotten the monologuing Anthony Hopkins.
I think he would have done it really well, especially
Probably.
There's a free audiobook of Dracula on Spotify. Highly recommend, because when that guy is doing his Van Helsing, he gets so into it, and it's very fun to listen to, because it's like 3 pages of monologuing where he's talking about like, there are so many things in the universe that we do not understand. In a very bad, like, Eastern European accent.
But at least he has fun with it, right?
At least he has fun with it, yeah.
Sounds fun.
All right, Keith, your turn.
It's me. Okay. 2.5 for others. I think the most believable thing that I sort of got from it was this idea that these two very virginal characters who haven't had very much life experience can be drawn into this more dangerous, exciting world. I thought it's a very silly but funny scene, the Arabian Nights scene, where she's like, "Ooh, can people really do that?" And it's like, I quite like that, just because it's almost like a commentary on something a bit more daring in literature, creeping its way into like the middle classes. But it's a fun little scene. But as I've said, with Jonathan and with Mina, I thought they were way too passive as characters, especially Jonathan. Like, one of the first things Van Helsing does is like pull a sword out at him, and he's like, "Oh, I've offended you. I apologize." And it's like, yeah, red flag straight away that this guy is a little bit of a psychopath. But Jonathan basically says, "Okay, I'll spend a month with you then." And I feel part of the vibe they were going for with that was then, like, he gained Jonathan's trust through like intimidation. And I think Jonathan said something similar at one point that he's just too afraid to leave. But I think as initially it seems a bit like, yeah, far-fetched, and he doesn't seem more freaked out than he is. Also, one thing I wondered is, where the hell is Jonathan getting the time or energy to write these really long letters? I mean, he's being ravished by these sexy, dark, sort of dangerous girls.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would spend the rest of the time just sleeping if it was me, or just like just recovering, reading, whatever. But there's that stuff. There's, as I said, the continuity or the lack of explanation about some of Dracula's powers. That's not really explained, like him sliding down the wall like Spider-Man. That stuff isn't really explained. I think some of the reactions, like, I quite like them when Mina sees Dracula in London, then she does at least have her guard up. But then after that, I think she's taken in too easy by his excuse for why he's actually there, and it should have been a red flag that this guy is sort of stalking you. And some of the reactions around Lucy, I think, were okay. Like, with the boyfriend, I sort of thought, even though I sort of wrote him off as a bit of a toff, a bit of a douche, it was like, I sort of got the impression he did care about her than she was dying. I thought he seemed okay with that, but again, it was just so easy, them just accepting them Van Helsing was the man to treat him. It was like, oh, well, I've studied under him. I know this guy. This guy is the best guy for the job. They took a lot on just his word on that.
Yeah.
And that was it. Van Helsing was in and we were away. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff where it's jumping about timelines and scenes and locations, and it's like I said with Mina, it's like one night she's meant to be having this erotic night with Dracula, and the next she's just back in, to a regular place, and it's like it's almost like nothing sort of happened. And I think it's the continuity with a lot of that stuff, and also believing in a lot of the relationships. Another thing I questioned initially with Lucy was she's presented as she's a bit more wild than Mina, and she's kind of like, well, she's into this stuff more. But then it makes the comment about how she's royalty, and I sort of think it would be the opposite with someone of that sort of like pedigree, if you like. It's sort of, or if they were like into the naughty stuff, it would be like they would keep it under wraps more. She was like shouting it from the rooftops, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that I didn't really buy. And then I think after that, it's just a lot of the stuff with the accents, a lot of the stuff with like the effects, which we've sort of already gone into. But it was definitely hit and miss. Like, I think there was some good like location work, some good sort of gothic imagery, but yeah, there was definitely stuff where you could see it was like computer generated effects and very sort of cheap and hokey. So
You didn't like the toy train?
Yeah, that was very obviously a toy train.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of it was we're just going to do our own thing in a way. And so I think with a lot of the movie, I kind of admire it. I appreciate it. But yeah, a lot of it falls flat. And a lot of it is just them rushing through things. Like the Noah's Ark thing is another example. Like how all those animals escaping through those bars, that kind of thing. They just sort of rush over it. So yeah, 2.5, I think.
So I give it a 2.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
V's over here, like, off in the ether.
It's fine. It's fine.
Again, though, mine comes entirely from like a completely different perspective of like the lore and the overarching vampire lore.
Yeah.
If you don't have any of that context, then yeah, this movie makes zero sense.
Yeah.
But even just from the effects, the relationships and interactions between certain characters and all, taking all of that into account, it definitely brought the score down. I do appreciate how they didn't just have Mina as a reincarnation. They had Van Helsing was a reincarnation as well. Anthony Hopkins played the priest in the very beginning as well.
Oh,
I didn't catch that.
totally,
Easy to miss.
that, yeah.
Easy to miss. But he was also the priest in the very beginning. That was warning him, hey, you don't want to do this. When he's going on a rampage about Elisabetta being dead. And, is this my reward for defending the church and all? And the priest is like, you might want to slow your roll there. So that was interesting, and makes it seem to the audience like it could actually be a possibility that they're not just, far off descendants or something. It could actually be reincarnation. That's kind of cool. But different practical things like Jonathan Harker being drained every night by the girls to keep him weak. Like they're draining his blood every night. No, he's dead.
Yeah.
He dead.
Maybe they're just having a little sippy sip.
Well, also in the movie, if Dracula bites someone, they've been turning just from the bite, not even from sharing blood. Like they get the full transformation from sharing the blood typically, but the transformation starts when they get bit. Jonathan Harker's been bit by these vampire chicks multiple times every night.
Well, but I think they established in the movie, though, that the lore on that is different. You have to exchange the blood with the vampire that bit you in order to
stay
change.
Consistent.
Yeah, in the movie, they didn't really make that clear as much with Lucy.
Yeah.
You just see Lucy turn, you know that she's being drained.
Yeah, that's true.
But you don't
They didn't show her taking any of the blood.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder also if it's a thing of he's the master, so maybe he's the only one who can turn.
Then it's sexist.
That's a good. No, well, okay.
They lose no matter what.
Well, the master vampire or whatever.
Desperate now, Jeff.
Yeah.
No, not desperate. I demand continuity. Damn it! I demand consistency.
Well, yeah, they didn't explain it, but I definitely got the vibe. Then, as the master, he was the one who could do that, and maybe they couldn't. That's the vibe. Sense. And I think they can control that. Like, they were just there to have a good time, party with Jonathan. And like, they weren't interested in turning him.
Nah, they just wanted the D.
They were having a Jonathan-flavored kegger.
No, they wanted the B because they were drinking his blood.
Well, it looks like they wanted both.
Well, yeah. You want to have some B and D with Jonathan?
Lucy mostly wanted the D. Mina definitely wanted the D, at least as far as the script goes. Not so much the chemistry between the actors, but
but yeah, I have been predetermined to want the D.
Yeah, and also when Lucy's about to die, like she's been drained several nights, and she's really, really, really sick. Van Helsing is like, we need to defend her tonight for sure at all costs. Otherwise, her soul will be lost. But first, food. Which, priorities, I get it. But but then he leaves the three dudes that really love Lucy to defend her. And two of them are kind of in the area looking out and patrolling, but the main fiance dude is by her bedside drinking himself to sleep. So that's really defending her. Didn't make sense.
He's
like you couldn't take the night off from
the poor guy.
So drink after.
Yeah, but he
not
doesn't
while
know
you're
how
on
long
duty.
This is going to last. There's nothing wrong with a
when
little
you're
sip on
supposed
duty.
to be on guard watching the person you love, or they're going to die.
I think it's
maybe
fine.
Be a bit more alert.
I don't know if it makes it better or worse, but by that particular point in time in the book, all three of the people, basically the entire boyfriend group, has been giving Lucy their blood every single night, because it'll be like, first the doctor gives her his blood, and then they're like, oh no, she's anemic, deathly anemic again the next day. What has happened? Mm-hmm. And then okay, we got to bring in boyfriend number 2, give her some blood. And then, oh no, the next night she's deathly anemic again. We give more blood.
Which would have made more sense if they showed more than just one scene of them giving blood.
Yeah, the way that they attempted to imply that all three of them have given blood was like the direct next scene when the Texan is like rolling his sleeve down
Yeah.
and makes a throwaway comment about it, and it's like,
Yeah.
again, if you haven't read the book, you have no idea what just happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they definitely need more context for the movie to make more sense and to have a higher rating. Because otherwise, it's an entertaining movie, but it's a cluster.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I feel like if you want to familiarize yourself somewhat with like the book or the classic story, then it's a good like middle ground where it's like, I know some people have trouble watching like the much older movies just because they just feel slow. So this one's kind of a good like middle ground of like, here's at least a reimagined version, but yeah, it as a movie definitely has some flaws.
Yeah.
But
also, if that many people were giving her their blood through transfusions, she would have to be a universal recipient.
They didn't know about blood types at that
I know.
time, to be fair.
I know. But still, I'm a docket.
yeah, I mentioned that to V2. I'm like, blood types.
Yeah.
They were like,
that's
we
a
don't know
thing.
what those are. Blood type, I don't know her.
Yeah.
But it's like, I guess since she was turning, maybe even if blood type was into account, it's like she would just absorb all of the blood. I don't know.
Might have, but again, there was no exposition, no context, nothing. We needed the monologues.
We needed the Van Helsing monologues.
We needed the Anthony Hopkins monologues.
I don't know if he would have physically been able to keep up a consistent accent through the monologues.
He definitely wouldn't have been, but
Every time they cut to a new angle, it's a different accent.
cut out a little bit of the weird non-chemistry Mina Dracula stuff that was honestly a little boring, and could have shoehorned some more exposition in, and it would have been a little better.
Yeah, that's very true.
I
Would have
think
been nice.
I think the problem is what you're describing is more a book than a film. So, as entertaining as it might have been, I'm not a big fan of having stuff kind of explained to me, overly explained in that sort of way. It kind of defeats the purpose of a film. So,
Yeah, but I like when there's a bit more lore added. So they
Well, they
didn't
could've
explain any of his powers or anything.
Added it more subtly, though,
Yeah.
too.
there's
Yeah.
other ways to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They could have done it in a more like visually entertaining way of like, I don't know, we've got some like giant ass mural or something that just shows Dracula turning into like a wolf and a bat and all this other shit. Like
And they didn't really explain much about Renfield either.
no, like Renfield was a throwaway character in this
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah. Tom Waits, though, very entertaining. By the way, the werewolf effect was terrible as well.
Yes.
That's
Yeah, that was
just a guy in a suit, basically.
that was bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, well, V, do you want to educate us on some vampire lore?
So when Alyssa and I were watching the movie the other night, my wife brought in this monster manual book with an entire section about vampires, and there's like 50 bullet points of folk tales and beliefs about vampires. It says, what follows is a summary of the habits, strengths, weaknesses, likes, and dislikes of this dreadful brood. And since we are leaving the realm of reason and entering the realm of horrible fantasy, some of the following statements contradict each other or are completely illogical. Let us begin.
Love that disclaimer.
Yeah. Vampires are not dead. Vampires are not alive. Vampires are undead. Vampires feed on human blood. Vampires bite the throats of their victims with 2 pointed fangs. Vampires look puffy and bloated after their meals. Vampires look years younger after they've drunk fresh blood. Vampires prefer their loved ones as victims. Vampires prefer the opposite sex as victims. A person who has been bitten once craves to be bitten again. Vampires are faithful to their victims until they are parted by death. Vampire victims die from excessive blood loss. Big surprise. People who have been bitten by a vampire become vampires themselves after death. People who have been bitten by a vampire do not turn into vampires after their death if the vampire that bit them is killed before the victim dies. Vampires communicate telepathically with their victims. Vampires have no power over people who carry a consecrated wafer or a cross. Vampires hate the smell of garlic. Vampires don't have a shadow, nor can they be seen in a mirror.
Just stayed out of Italy altogether.
Yeah, basically.
Italy safe.
Yep. Vampires are pale, with reddish eyes and moist crimson lips. Vampires have only one nostril. Vampires have hair on their palms of their hands and long, pointed fingernails. Vampires have a pointed needle at the end of their tongues. Vampires give off a moldy, rotten stench. Vampires can transform themselves only at dawn and dusk. Vampires can transform themselves at any time of the day, of the night. Vampires can transform themselves into wolves, dogs, and bats. Vampires have the ability to find hidden treasures. Vampires have power over dogs, rats, wolves, bats, and the weather. Female vampires are meaner than male vampires. Vampires can live to be more than 1,000 years old. Vampires can climb up smooth walls like a lizard.
He's a gecko.
They're going to sell you car insurance. Vampires can enter a house only if they are invited. After having been asked once, they may enter whenever they like.
We've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty.
Oh man, it just like this head peering through the window.
From like the top.
Yeah.
Vampires cannot cross flowing water. Vampires sleep in coffins. A vampire cannot leave its coffin when a spray of wild roses lies on top of it. A werewolf becomes a vampire after its death. People who commit suicide become vampires if they are not buried at a crossroads. Vampires die on exposure to daylight. Vampires don't die on exposure to daylight. They merely become weak. A vampire can be killed only if a hard wooden stake or glowing hot iron stake is thrust through its heart, nailing it to the bottom of its coffin. Vampires can be killed by having their heads cut off. Their mouths then have to be stuffed with garlic. Vampires who have taken on Vampires who have taken on the form of a wolf can be killed by a silver bullet that has been dipped in holy water. Cannot just be a regular silver bullet.
Interesting.
Very old vampires disintegrate into dust when they are killed. A dead vampire who does not disintegrate into dust has to be buried at a crossroads. Vampirism is a form of penance for one's sins. Vampires want to be relieved of their suffering, but they are forced to resist all temptations to relieve themselves. Vampires celebrate their most important holiday on November 30th. Vampires celebrate their most important holiday on April 26th. Vampires exist. Vampires do not exist.
Some of those are like so interesting though.
Yeah.
And like the garlic, I wonder why like garlic became a thing.
That one I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look that up.
Like silver, I can kind of understand why. Of course, religious symbols, that is like I make perfect sense on why that would be associated.
And I get iron too.
The hot iron, yeah.
Yeah. I
Um,
don't know why hot specifically, but
It's hot.
I mean, if you can survive like a hot iron rod being put through your heart, then that's an entirely different set of problems.
well, yeah, but same can be said for beheading. So, you know.
Fair.
But it's like, I feel like with like werewolves and maybe like even witches and stuff, I feel like the lore isn't quite as vast and varied as it is for specifically vampires. Like vampires, the lore is absolutely insane, where it's like you either have like conflicting things or I mean, modern vampires versus like the origins of vampire is like night and day. It's completely different. Really, the only thing that they've really kept much is the teeth, and then the fact that they drink blood, and that they kind of like seduce their victims. But yeah, just like such a huge difference. It's pretty crazy.
I would also say that like with like witches, those are very varied because every single culture has its own type of magical old woman who probably lives in the forest.
Yeah.
That's true.
When really the reality is probably she's just tired of everyone's shit and wants to be left alone.
Yeah. But
the treasure hunting one was one I picked up on. That sounds fun. You could do a movie with Dracula like treasure hunting. That would be a fun.
man, Dracula, the treasure hunter.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of funny hearing the vampires are loyal to their victims until death. And then the very next one was they are often drained and dead.
Yeah, victims of vampires die by blood loss.
Yeah.
And I know I was telling V this. It's interesting the additional lore that has been added, because I cannot remember which movie or even book that I came across this, because this was when I was younger. But there's one lore where if a vampire can't completely drain a person, because if they drain them, then the vampire will die. But like whenever they start to drink, it's almost like a drug where it's like they're addicted and they want to finish it. So they literally have to take all of their self-control to pull away from the person, just so that way they won't die by draining them. I thought that was really...
That's been in a few different books and series. I'm pretty sure it was in Anne Rice's book, Interview with a Vampire. And I know it was in True Blood.
Yeah, I was thinking True Blood. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like there's some additional things that have been added to the lore that I think are really cool.
Yeah. Well, we gotta nerf them somehow.
A lot of things that got added to the lore that made them less cool.
Yeah.
Like sparkly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you didn't need to add the sparkles, because we'd already have a vampire that can walk in the sunlight. It's like you didn't have to.
That was unnecessary. I do like how Supernatural did it. They had retractable teeth as well, but it was a whole bunch. Ooh. It was almost like shark teeth. They would all come down.
That's cool.
And it was really interesting. They also wouldn't die if they were in the sunlight. It would just kind of irritate them, and their senses were extremely heightened. Blood sharing was a thing as well. If you got bit by a vampire, you wouldn't turn unless you were given some of their blood. Beheading worked on them. Stakes just slowed them down and made them mad.
Well, and see, like, the whole, like, being bitten and automatically you're a vampire, that never made a lot of sense as far as, like, a population control thing, because that would mean that you would have to, like, kill a whole bunch of these new vampires. Otherwise, everyone in the whole world will eventually become a vampire. And it's like, what do you do with that? Like,
Yeah,
and, like, I'm currently reading this interesting book series that's by Guillermo del Toro and forget the name of the other author, but and apparently they made a miniseries about it. But I haven't watched the miniseries. But with that one, vampirism is actually like it's less supernatural and more closer to zombie infection, where it's like parasites in your blood that are controlling you, and like
Is it strain?
and like the book in the series I'm reading right now is called The Fall. But yeah, it's that one. And that one, it's interesting to see what pieces of vampire lore are being used in that one, because with that one, the point at the end of the tongue thing they kind of work in there, but it's a barb underneath the tongue that can shoot up to like 5 to 6 feet.
Yeah.
Oh.
So they don't have to get up close to you; they can just go.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
Yeah.
And I think for me as well, one of the more interesting things you can do with modern vampire stories is actually explore how they would interact with everyday society, like modern society, just because of how alien things like technology would be to them. You can have a lot of fun with that stuff. And I mean, partly what the series Angel does, but exploring how a vampire has to coexist in modern day life. And I feel like now, because obviously a lot of horror has moved out of the castles and into like suburbia, that kind of setting. And I feel that's where a lot of the updating comes in now. And you can do like, there's always room for like a good throwback, you know, like vampire in a castle. If it's done right, you're still going to enjoy it. But I think for some people that seems a bit of the time, and now it's time to move them into more modern locations.
Yeah. I also want to see a little less romanticism with it. Because they're supposed to be like preying on humans. Like they're going to be surrounded by food, basically.
Yeah, like that movie that we reviewed, 30 Days of
Night. Yeah. That was refreshing.
That's like a modern version of like a very predatory type of vampire.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I will say the evolution into the paranormal romance for vampires was going to be pretty natural and inevitable, because a lot of vampire lore, especially when you start getting to like the Dracula and Carmilla canonization, is a lot of like the evils of sexuality.
Yeah.
And so then once we got a little bit later on, and we start getting into like Anne Rice and stuff like that, then it's like, okay, well, we're getting more like free love, and so we're going to be like, okay, but is sexuality really evil? Let's explore that with like the dangerously sexual vampire type of thing.
I think with the whole romance side of it, it comes down to a taste thing. Like, because my co-host Rachel really loves stuff like that, and I think it's just another way you can expand on their characters and their curiosities, where they do live very lonely, solitude lives. So in some regards, you can see why they would become like interested in human.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I get that, but I feel like it's overdone lately.
Yeah. And I think the best stuff is the stuff that also is honest about some of the drawbacks of a vampire and a human having you know, because I quite like that. I mean, Near Dark's a great movie, but that's something that does, where it doesn't sugarcoat, you know, like the complications that you would have if you're going to pursue that. And so I think as long as they like explore that side of thing, even if they want to say, okay, ultimately they're going to have a relationship and be together, as long as they explore the more difficult side and the darker side, then. But it probably is overdone. Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, and I also like the ones where it's like, okay, yeah, we can have the romance, but also these are extremely dangerous, and it's kind of like, kind of going about it kind of almost equating like falling in love with a vampire is like having a pet tiger.
Yeah.
Like, is it really a good idea for either you or the tiger?
Yeah.
And someone's probably going to end up dead at some point.
Most likely the human.
Most likely, yeah. And so, like, there are some authors that I feel do that better than others.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I was in high school, I read a lot of Laurel K. Hamilton's Anita Blake series, and that one, Anita Blake's a messy bitch. Like, because she's a vampire hunter, and she ends up falling in love with a vampire, and there's a lot of exploration in sexuality. There's actually a lot of like polyamory exploration in there. In a lot of really interesting ways. But that's also in a lot of Laurel K. Hamilton stuff because, surprise, surprise, she's in a polyamorous relationship. So it's right what you know, right?
Yeah.
So there's one book in there that's one of my least favorite books in the series, but I understand why it would be interesting to explore, where the A plot of the book is Anita might be pregnant, and it might be one of her vampire boyfriends or one of her werewolf boyfriends, and either way, she is a human, and that's going to go poorly for her.
As if pregnancy wasn't hard enough.
Yeah. And then at the end, they're like, oh, it turns out she's not actually pregnant. And it's like, they spent the entire book over nothing.
Yeah. Like, never mind.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Control Z.
Yeah. Basically. And there's actual like danger plot as well, but they treat that as like the B plot. Of like, oh, there's these super powerful vampires that are in the area that she's going to have to fight and kill. But that's the B plot to the like, is she going to survive being pregnant type of thing.
Gotcha. But
when the author doesn't like the way they were taking it originally and decides to retcon it themselves.
In the same book.
Yeah. Never mind, psych.
It's like, I was going through a phase.
Yeah.
This was an interesting thought experiment, but...
Yeah.
I don't like the path that my thoughts have been taking, so...
Well, I think we've touched on everything that there is to touch on for Dracula and vampires, unless if anyone has anything else they'd like to add before we wrap up.
Blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to give a big thank you to Keith and V for being a part of this 200th episode.
Yes.
We are very close to our 4-year anniversary, which is absolutely bonkers to me. And the podcast would not be the same without either one of you being a part of it. So we really appreciate that you both were able to join. And I will link stuff for Keith and V's socials, contacts, YouTube channels below. Everything.
I'm just going to add to the link tree.
Yeah. But thank you so much for joining us today and let us know what you thought of the movie. I would also love to hear like what your take on vampire lore is, or if you have like a favorite like a supernatural like creature. But
what's your favorite lore of vampires?
Yes. If there's anything that maybe we didn't touch on, definitely bring that up. But if you would like to recommend a movie, game, or tea, you can leave us a comment or join our Discord. And our link tree is listed below if you'd like to keep up to date with our content.
Yes. And if you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share our content and Keith's and V's content as well.
Yeah.
We also have a Teespring and a PayPal donate button if you'd like to support us monetarily. And you can find all of the sites mentioned linked below in the giant growing link tree. Until the next time, guys, stay safe and stay spoopy. Bye.
Bye.